Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And as always, I have a fascinating guest with me today. Her name is April Chavez. She is the mother of three beautiful miracle daughters. She's a former police officer, the Viking of Hiking, a talk show host, and microphone maven. She is also a survivor who was diagnosed with lupus at the age of 15 and has experienced symptoms since birth. April combines her life experience and passion for serving others by creating the Wellness Driven Life Show, which is a place to serve a large community of people to help them obtain total wellness. So, April, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Hey, Cheryl, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as your guest. I'm excited to start a good conversation and enlighten some people on my journey.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to hear it. But before we start, I do want the audience to know that I was recently a guest on your fabulous show.
Yeah.
And I'm still just so honored. So I want the listeners to know that the title of the episode was An Interview with the Real Princess of Power. Cheryl Ilov on health, healing, and martial arts. So your podcast links is in the show notes. So I want everybody to check out April's show. It's amazing. She does 5 shows a week, and I don't know how she does it.
Yeah, well, definitely it is a lot, isn't it? And the titles of the episodes, you have to get creative, Cheryl. And the reason that I came up with that title for yours is because Shira, the Princess of Power, was my childhood idol, so to speak. And so when I read your story and you have that incredible picture of you holding the sword on your cover, you really are embodying that modern day hero. And so those are kind of the things that start clicking. And again, you have to be so creative. So I'm like, I'm going to put a twist on this and put in the childhood hero, because I think that for so many of us, when we are able to create that in our own lives and not make it such a fantasy, then it makes things so much easier. We feel empowered by that.
Absolutely. Well, I have to admit, you don't know this, so I'm going to tell you now. So don't tell anybody. It'll just be our little secret that I actually had to look it up. I had to Google it because I had no idea who the Princess of Power was, because I didn't grow up with that. So it was a real honor to be able to figure out or find out who she was. And I even did a blog post about it.
Ah, awesome, awesome. I'm gonna have to look into that blog post. Yeah, I'm an 80s baby. So that was definitely the cartoon, right along with He-Man and the Ninja Turtles and Transformers. And that was definitely my era where I have been brought up into that. And to include Mortal Kombat, I was really excited when I got to interview Chris Casamassa, because he's the real Scorpion. Get over here.
Ooh.
So that's definitely my era, and have been very much influenced by.
I see. Well, okay. Well, let's talk about your story, because I think you are a hero. You're a real life warrior and a real life hero. Just the fact that, I mean, I was shocked to see that you were diagnosed with lupus at the age of 15.
Mm.
You had been having symptoms even, from the time you were born. So I want you to tell us about that and tell us what it was like. And especially, you said your mother was a nurse or is a nurse, and
Mhm.
having a baby with, some of those symptoms and stuff, it must have driven her crazy. So just tell us a little bit of your journey and how this all came about. And then the next step is to explain to us what made you become a police officer. So to start with the as you were a baby.
First things first, right? Well,
Yes.
we are all the heroes of our own journey. And so I think I came into the world, when we think about our trials and tribulations, they really launch us to become who we are, and the choices that we make and how we want to express ourselves and how we want to move forward. And I think I came kind of in an advantage, so to speak, even though there's been immense difficulties. But it was an advantage because as a child, you view things so differently. And when you have an illness or a disease, when you think about children who are near death or they're extremely ill, they're so brave, aren't they? You
Mhm,
know, they just handle it so gracefully,
mhm,
and it's a beautiful thing, and it's amazing, and it's the parents who are a mess, right? The people around them, the adults who are falling apart, and yet the child is so strong. And I
mhm,
think because I went through difficulties, there's just something about a child where you you have that strength and you continue on. A lot of it too was I didn't want it to define me. And
mhm,
because I was living with it so long, I wasn't one of those people, or I didn't have the attitude of wanting to stay in that state. I wanted to be a kid. I wanted to play sports. I wanted to be normal. I mean, that was one of the most struggling things, is that everybody else was normal and they could go play sports and they could go do all the things and they didn't have to leave school early or run to the bathroom
mhm,
because they were, they had this extreme nosebleed, and again having to
mm,
leave or visit the hospital once a week. Like, I just wanted to be normal. And so I fought for that. And my mentality was like, I don't want this to be me. So I think that played a very great role throughout my life, and it still does, that
mhm,
this is not going to define me.
mhm.
And when I went into my teenage years after testing and testing as a kid, they didn't know. They thought I had leukemia. I went through bone marrow transplants and
Oh,
uh or sorry, not the transplant, excuse me, but
the biopsies.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, and platelet transfusion, that was one thing that I went through, but many, many testing, and they didn't know. Lupus, systemic lupus, is something that you have to do pretty intense blood work on to find it. Well, they
Wow.
finally found it when I was 15 after going into the hospital a lot because I was in so much pain, Cheryl, and I didn't know why. Well, it was very frustrating because they thought I was just coming in to get drugged up.
Of
And so
course.
that's a lot of what people do too,
Mhm,
and if you can't see and find anything that's wrong, then they assume that that's what you're there for.
mhm.
And we finally found it at the age of 15, and the doctor told my mom that I wouldn't make it to C30. And she didn't disclose that to me until I was a couple years after I had turned 30.
Wow.
And he said that I would never bear children. And so at the ripe young age of 18, I was like, well, what am I taking birth control for? I was sexually active as an 18-year-old,
Mhm,
and I stopped taking the birth control and I became pregnant. And then I thought, well, I guess I'll miscarry, but that didn't happen either. And so I had a kid very young. I wasn't planning on it because I didn't think that I could. So I had these aspirations to go to college and, get this 10-year degree and forensic entomology and do all the things. And that changed my life
wow.
again forever.
Wow, okay, I'm just sitting here just taking this roller coaster ride with you. I mean, what an incredible story that you have. And
Yeah.
I love the fact that you said to yourself that this will not define me.
Yeah.
And I want to take it a step further because it's not only were you saying this will not define me, you were saying this will not defeat me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I didn't want to live that life.
Mhm.
I want to be able to explore the world. I have
Mhm.
that exploratory mentality, that curiosity. And a lot of that changes when you have kids, and you're put
Mhm.
into different situations, especially when you're young and you don't have the means that you so desire to be able to travel abroad. I mean, I didn't go
Mhm.
see the ocean until I was, I think, 36, something like
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
Uh, and it was always my dream, hence the picture in the background.
Mhm. I
I do
see.
love the ocean. And, things just kind of change. and alter everything, where you have to make different choices because you're caring for not only yourself
Mhm.
but others. And I had 3 daughters,
Mhm.
as you mentioned in the beginning, and they're beautiful and they're healthy. And while pregnancy wasn't easy,
Mhm.
uh, I wasn't one of those people that enjoyed being pregnant
Mhm.
either. It was not fun. It didn't feel great. I was miserable. And at the same time, it's you learn what to die for when you have your first child.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm sure. Okay, so many things I really love about this so far that you love the ocean and you actually grew up in a place that was kind of landlocked. You grew up in Colorado, didn't you?
I did. I did grow up in Colorado. However, Cheryl, I'm one of those firm believers where if you have anything like a big body of water or mountain regions
Mhm.
or the ocean, those are things that just have this incredible energy. And so I'm
Mhm.
definitely a mountain girl. I love the mountains. I hike a lot. I think I
Mhm.
have that in my bio, don't I? Where I'm the Viking of hiking
Oh yes,
because
you have that and yes,
yeah,
because I love
anywhere
that.
I go or live, I really wanna be in a place and space where nature plays a big role in my life. I
Mhm.
like to be
Mhm.
outdoors. That's part of my maintaining my health,
Mhm.
and we can talk a little bit of that later if you want. But I wanna go back to, because I know one of your questions is,
Mhm.
how did I go into law enforcement?
Mhm.
And I think I mentioned prior to becoming pregnant, I had wanted to go into forensic entomology.
Mhm.
And if people don't know what that is, it's the life cycle of insects attacking like a corpse. And so if you're really into like the criminal investigations and the all of those things, that was really interesting to me. And I wanted to learn more. So it was really that scientific curiosity.
Mhm.
How do these things happen? And also the life after death sort of thing. So not only the curiosity of this physical realm that we live in, but also the all the parts that you can't see. Because
Mhm.
throughout my life, it all makes a difference the more that you learn and know about that, and how we show up with our own health and our bodies and our
Mhm.
minds.
Mhm.
So that wasn't really a possibility for me at the time, taking care of children.
Mhm.
And so I just didn't feel I could commit to that kind of
Mhm.
education. And so I decided, well, what else can I do to kind of go into that field?
Mhm.
And there was a couple of reasons why I chose to go into law enforcement. First of all, I did a 2-year degree in criminal justice, so that was kind of the beginning of it. I didn't want to
Mhm.
go into nursing.
Mhm.
My mom, as you said, she was a nurse, but I didn't want to serve people that way because I had
Mhm.
grown up seeing that, and I was like, mm-mm, no, no, I'd rather not. Thank you. But I'm
Understood. Mhm.
happy. I'm happy to throw you in cuffs and in the back of my truck. I can serve that way.
You are so full of surprises.
So I also grew up during the Columbine shooting era. So
Oh.
that is during the time that I was in high school. So it was
Mhm.
actually the high school I was supposed to be going to, but I
Oh,
ended up going to Littleton High. But it all happened and we were all very much affected. We knew
right.
people. It was a big thing for us at the time. And so I think a
Mhm.
lot of people that experienced that, who survived, really wanted to do something, give back, bringing community in some
Mhm.
capacity, because nobody wants anything like that to happen ever again.
No.
And law enforcement also was a way for me to not let the autoimmune disease define me. The military wouldn't take me because they had access to health records. They wouldn't. I tried for that. I really wanted to do that. But law enforcement would. And going back to kind of forensic entomology, per my research, if I had spent enough time in law enforcement and kind of had the boots on the ground experience,
Mhm.
then eventually you go into detective work and you can
Mhm.
fall into that field. So
Mhm.
that was kind of my mind frame on this is how I can show up to prove to myself and others that I'm strong enough,
Mhm.
that I am not the disease, that I'm
Mhm.
capable. And when you're around surrounded by lots of men who are much larger and stronger than you are, and you just want to defeat all the odds and prove to everybody that, you know, you can do it and you're
Mhm.
capable, that was really how I went into it.
You are very, very courageous to do that and to step into that world.
Yeah. It wasn't easy, definitely.
Mhm.
It was humiliating a lot of times. It took a lot of courage, to show up, especially after having 3 children. You know,
Wow.
I was no longer the young one. You know, a lot of people when they first enter into law enforcement, they're in their, early 20s. And
Mhm.
so I think that when I first entered into it, I was in my late 20s and I had already had 3 children.
Wow.
So I didn't have the physical aspect of it either. So
Mhm.
police academy was a challenge, but
Mhm.
I did it because I was so determined and
Mhm.
headstrong that I ended up doing very well.
Mhm. There's an awful lot to be said for incomparable stubbornness.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I have it myself, and it's gotten me through a lot of really tough situations. But when I'm thinking about this. So there you were in your late 20s when you entered the police force.
Hmm.
And years ago, when you were 15, the doctor had told your mother that you would not even live to see 30. And yet here you are right there on the cusp of turning 30, and
Yeah.
that's what you were doing.
Yeah. That's a great point, Cheryl. I didn't really think about that. And really because I don't like to think about the disease.
Right,
And
right.
that's how much I'm like, I don't like to read up on it.
Mhm,
I don't like
mhm,
to see all the things that can happen to you.
mhm,
Like,
mhm,
I'm just like, okay, that's nice. I kind of
mhm,
go about it in a way of if it happens, I deal with it and I
mhm,
address it. And I have really taken myself to learn a lot outside
mhm,
of what the medical
mhm,
arena says,
mhm,
because they weren't always right. I mean, I gave you 2 major examples
mhm,
of that's not true. And
mhm,
that didn't really come to fruition.
mhm,
And I didn't allow it to. I didn't
mhm,
keep thinking about it all the time. I mean, even
mhm,
after my mom said, I mean, it kind of freaked me out a little bit. I'm like, wow. I mean, that's really what they said. They didn't suspect. And um, yeah, the autoimmune disease can get very, very bad. It
mhm,
can lead to death. I've had many near death experiences.
mhm,
And again, Cheryl, I think part of the draw to law enforcement and why I did so well with it was because I know that tomorrow is not uh, for certain,
mhm,
and anything can happen at any time. And so I kind of went in with like this fearlessness, or
mhm,
I wouldn't say fearlessness, but I was just really good at it
mhm,
because I didn't necessarily fear death. I mean, I
mhm,
do. I'm human,
mhm,
but again, I just kind of deal with things as they come.
mhm,
And I realized that so much about myself, that this journey with an autoimmune disease since
mhm,
for my whole life,
mhm,
that the way that I show up is is kind of great, and it's kind of
mhm.
needed in the world because I was able to
Absolutely.
respond in a way of that was needed at the time in order to
Mhm.
help somebody.
I just love that because this is a lot of the theme in a lot of my episodes is not accepting the labels that people put on you.
Mm,
And especially in the medical community, and I can say this, I worked in the medical community for 40 years in 2 different areas, as a respiratory therapist and as a physical therapist. But we are so willing and eager almost and ready to put labels on people And it's like, well, this is what you are, and you'll never get better. You have to deal with this for the rest of your life. And that's what I was told when I was in my mid-30s with my chronic pain syndrome, until
Mm,
it was finally like, after 2.5 years of hell, it was like, I am not going to do this anymore. I am not accepting this. This is not my life. And I've
right.
talked to so many people over the years who have done the same thing of like, you can't tell me that this is going to be my future. There has got to be another way. And most of the time there is. But
Mhm.
if you had gone online every single day and done your research to find out exactly what was going to happen, it would almost be like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
All of those negative, terrible things would come true.
Right. Yeah, I don't recommend that to people. I do recommend looking up things to like healthy eating habits, meditations, all of the
Mhm,
things that you can better yourself because I think what's incredible about this time, Cheryl, is now people are really coming to the knowing of uh we we are powerful beings and we
mhm,
can heal ourselves and it's coming out
mhm,
more and more. That's really what my show I like to focus on it. I have many, many different guests. Again, I have
mhm,
people 5 days a week, and so I have a lot of people from different backgrounds. A lot of it
mhm,
is story of resilience,
mhm,
but some of my favorite and more passionate subjects is that we are powerful enough to heal ourselves because
mhm,
I've done it.
mhm,
And there's a lot of people that have done it and they're doing it and they continue to do it. And that message is really coming across.
mhm. Well, thank you for bringing that up, because we could never emphasize that enough on this show or any other show, is that we do have that kind of inner power to heal ourselves, and our bodies have the capacity to heal from almost anything as long as we give
Mhm.
it the right environment. And part of finding that environmental component is the mindset.
Yeah.
So I think that no matter how many times we hear that, we can never hear it enough. And I'm glad that people are starting to talk about that. And, I remember when I was back when I had my chronic pain syndrome, and of course that was 30 years ago, but there was no emphasis on natural healing. There was no,
Right.
there was nothing like, okay, try this Feldenkrais thing, or try this,
Mhm.
acupuncture, or try, Reiki, or there are so many other modalities that can help with healing. And what works for one person might not work for anybody else, but it
Mm.
all starts with making that decision. I am not going to live like this.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to accept the labels that other people put on me. Oh, okay. Now you got me all hot and bothered here. Okay.
Yeah.
I just think it's so important. So, okay. So then when did you leave the force, and why did you leave the force? Because you did love it so much.
I did. The department that I was with wasn't a good fit for me at the
Ah,
time. And, not everybody talks about it in law enforcement. In fact, the law enforcement community is really quiet.
mm.
And the reason is because everybody hates you, first off. I shouldn't say everybody, but
Most
the
everybody.
the general consensus it people don't like to be um you know shown how to do things or to abide by rules and regulations,
Mhm,
although we may need them, right? But people don't care for that. And so it's a very challenging position. And not only that is you are really trained to show up as someone much different than what you did before and what
mhm,
you do maybe even in your personal life. You're very conditioned
mhm,
and trained to show up as something else because you have to be in that mindset at a split second in order to make decisions that's going to be in the best benefit. And
right.
it's challenging to be able to navigate that gracefully. There are few that are able to do it, and they're
Mhm,
amazing people, amazing officers that are, and people in, any area of, having to be in those leadership positions, those roles, those authoritative positions, and being able to go in and out of that to I
mhm,
like to call it the warrior in the garden. And I mention that term a lot on my show because martial
mhm,
arts really shows that too. It's where you have the knowledge to be
mhm,
able to fight and
mhm,
to, take care of business. And also you have that grace to be gentle with others and compassionate. And
Mhm.
so, but when you're early on, especially as a young person going into that field, you feel like you have to show up as that authoritative figure, right? Because you're kind
Mhm.
of on edge. You haven't really felt the things out. And when you put on that uniform, you just kind of become this different person
Mhm.
because anything horrific can happen at any time. You can have somebody switch on a dime. And so you have to really
Mhm.
be prepared for that. And it's difficult to really relax
Mhm.
and then something happen and respond right away. So that's why they're really kind of on edge
Mhm.
most of the time.
Well, that's an awful lot of pressure on your nervous system because you are
Yes,
always kind of on alert. You can't really let your guard down. And
right?
to be able to go from a situation where everything is just so smooth, running along, and then all of a sudden, the stuff hits the fan and things are falling apart, and you have to go from 0 to, 100 in a split second is really, really hard. It's hard on
Eh,
your brain, it's hard on your body, it's hard on your
right.
emotions.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't realize until later on how much that position was not a good fit for me.
Mhm,
Because not only that, what you just described, how you're pretty amped, but
mhm,
it's the people that you're surrounded by. You're dealing with the worst of the worst. I mean, people who are in
right.
really, really low energy, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm,
so even though you want to make this big difference and you want to try to heal, like that's really not necessarily how you do it.
mhm,
I learned later on that it all starts with yourself. Um, so much of the frustration was we had a lot of calls that were domestic violence, DVs. So
mhm,
most of our calls were that.
mm,
And so you'd see these people who were in the cycle and they would just keep going back to that the nature of violence that they were experiencing over and over and over because we that's what we do as human beings.
mhm,
We continue to go back to that and because it's comfortable. Even if
mhm,
it's not good for us, it's the
mhm,
comfort zone. It's familiar to us.
mhm,
And so of course there's frustration where I'm like, why don't people just get it? Why don't they listen to? And and again, I kind of learned later on that it starts with me. And if
mhm,
I can show up and do the work within myself and be a bigger light, then
mhm,
it'll spread.
mhm.
So I think that what I do now, I really very much enjoy because I get to push out information that's really great and it'll fall on the ears that it needs to fall on. And it
Mhm.
will attract the people who really are interested in making a change for themselves.
So, did you come up with this idea right away when you left the force that you were going to do this podcast and create this community? How did that come about?
Oh, Cheryl, it took years.
Okay.
No, this is a long time. Uh, we all have this journey and we all learn at different
Mm,
stages. And there were things that I had to experience and go through in order to get to this point. Just like I'm
mhm,
going to have to go through more experiences and journeys to get to another greater point in the
mhm,
future. And so, no, this took many years. But what I can say, one of the most profound things that I had noticed is that when I had experienced traumatic events in my
mhm,
life or major changes, major transition is about 6 months later-ish, I would get very sick and my
mm,
body would respond with all of that, like anxiety built up, all of the frustration, the pain, the hurt, the anger, the all of it would start showing up.
mm,
And so not a great thing, but also a great thing that I was able to see that
mhm,
over the stretch of my lifetime, and I started
mhm,
noticing a pattern, was I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's something
mm,
here." When I came into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work is really when I was like, oh my gosh, he is talking about the stuff that like I know
Mhm.
internally, like I get, but I don't know how to explain it. And
Mhm.
he explains it and backs it by science and continues to
Mhm.
do the science behind it. And so I really fell in love with and started learning more about that.
Mhm.
When I first started having kids, it really pushed me to want to be as healthy as I possibly could be for them. I had a girlfriend growing up during my teenage years, and her mom had MS. And so I grew up watching this woman be in agony and eventually to her death. But
No.
I also watched my friends and even myself. I was really involved. I was there a lot. But I watched that whole scenario and I didn't want that for my
Mhm.
kids because
Mhm.
I knew that that was a possibility when you have an autoimmune disease.
Mhm.
And lupus, it's kind of one of those fun ones where it'll show up as all sorts of different things. And
Mhm.
um, so I really started learning about how to best live, nutrition. So
Mhm.
the nutrition aspects, not buying things with labels, or if I have to read the labels, do I understand them? Do they have limited
Mhm.
ingredients? The sugars, the breads, what does all this mean? And how does
Mhm.
it affect me and my children? Like I don't want this to be passed to them. Um,
Mhm.
so how do I best create that? So that's really my journey. How I started getting really interested in it and taking care of myself was right after having children because I had
Mhm.
more than myself to live for. I started realizing that I'm a little more important now. And I really have to take this taking care of myself thing seriously. And then, so when we talk about the physical, the spiritual, the
Mhm.
intellectual, all of those things take a play. I like to say that wellness is under this massive umbrella. It's
Mhm.
not just one or two things, but it's the environmental factors, it's the internal, it's
Mhm.
the spiritual, it's all of those things. And so learning about all those things individually takes time.
Mhm. It does take time, but it's so empowering at the same time. Because,
Yeah.
you're just learning to me, it was like putting together the pieces of a puzzle. And, sometimes you'd lose a piece and you wouldn't find it, it'd be under the couch for a couple of weeks or months. But it's a way of just putting together what you need for yourself. And because we are dynamic, organisms, things are always changing. So we have to be able to be paying attention to, okay, my body doesn't need that anymore. It now needs something else, and to really be in tune. So I'm glad that you talked about that. And I also want to go back to what you said about how 6 months later, after you would have like, a stressful event, that's when you would get sick and feel it in your body. And
Yeah.
that just really, really resonated with me because I can remember seeing a naturopath, and I had seen him over the years off and on for several different reasons. And one time came in and it was like, oh my God, I'm a mess, of my stomach, and, my hair's falling out, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then he put it together and he says, "And how long ago did this happen?" And I said, 6 months. He goes, "You're right on time." I thought, well, that's good to know. So it does
Yeah, it's
sometimes,
interesting.
yeah, it does sometimes take a while for it to show up.
Yeah. But let it be the lesson that
Right.
it'll show up.
It will show
So
up.
to be very mindful about
Mhm.
what we're thinking. And
Mhm.
Cheryl, to be completely transparent, I love that you brought up the puzzle thing.
Mm.
How like there's all these puzzle pieces and you find a piece and then you lose it. But like to me, I start to think of, okay, you're gathering all of this information. There's so much information out there, right?
Mhm.
And so we're like computer systems and we're always gathering all this information. And so there's times when we learn about something and we're like, oh wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But we lose that piece. And so we're not applying it and we're not
Mhm.
utilizing it. And then eventually we find it and it comes back
Mhm.
into our life and we're like, okay, we're gonna put this piece where it belongs
Mhm.
and apply what we have learned.
Mhm.
And I say right now, I'm struggling with the mental parts, my thoughts. And that is
Mm.
such a huge key, but I find myself just thinking negatively and I can't
Mhm.
sleep. And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
what is this? But the reality is I have to nip it quick, because if I
Mhm.
continue on that path, I know that it's going to show up.
Mhm.
And sometimes for me, it shows up pretty quickly.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes immediately. And I'm like, oh, especially with matters of the heart. Oh my
Uh-huh.
gosh, I will get heart pain when it comes to issues with my kids,
Mhm.
or matters of the heart, like very, very much affect me. And so I have to be very conscientious of how I'm thinking and start to
Mhm.
turn it around, because it will show up. It's that
Mhm.
mirror.
Mhm. Again, I'm so glad you brought that up, but it seems like, especially, right about now, the world's going like crazy. And it's sometimes really hard to turn off those negative thoughts and those negative feelings, because we're constantly being bombarded with information. And most of the time, it's not really good stuff and not really positive, happy stuff. So that's why I always tell people that, we need to turn off the devices. We need to go outside, just like nature is the best
Mm,
place to heal. I mean, what
it
an
is.
incredible experience a lot of times, just walking outside and getting away from the TV or the radio. Or my husband's retired now, yay. So getting away from him and just sitting outside just for a few minutes is almost like hitting that refresh button. And it's like, okay,
Is.
I can calm down now, everything's fine, and go back in.
Yeah, I also, Cheryl, really I love to empower people with all sorts of things. I mean, we're in different stages and places of
Mhm.
life. Like, water is a really good grounding, refreshing. It's cleansing, right? Just like rain. But like, even if you just wash your hands or put some water on your face or take a bath or take a shower, that's a
Mhm.
really good way to kind of heal and ground yourself in that moment.
Mhm.
And yeah, nature, absolutely. Sunshine, but really tuning into the life that's around you, the trees and
Mhm.
the animals and the
Mhm.
insects and the birds, and listening to that.
Mhm.
I have found, um, one of the biggest things that I had to learn was surrender and to be
Mhm.
quiet. But when we start to just listen to our bodies, intuition, that's a really
Mhm.
big key word. I mean, everybody knows what intuition is, but really that's quieting down and listening to yourself.
Mhm.
And you'll find that you hear the things that you need to hear.
Mhm. I'd like to talk just a wee bit more about intuition, and there's a reason why. It's something that I'm in the process of writing. It's a project. And sometimes I think that, because our intuition is so powerful and it is so strong, especially in women. And even when I was a little girl growing up, I remember the grown-ups always talking about, women's intuition and women's intuition. And even the men would be very respectful of it and say, oh, well, my wife said,
Mm.
this, and it was her intuition talking, and I just listened to her. But it seems like over the years, that intuition was not as well respected, or not as appreciated as much, or even poo-pooed. And like, oh, that's just, you're making it up, or you're hysterical, or that's just an old wives' tale. And me being a suspicious person, I always wonder, why is that? And is it because, it seems like we've been encouraged not to follow our intuition or not to listen to it. And then we kind of lose the ability to follow it and lose the ability to listen to it. So again, a suspicious person like myself might think, I wonder if that is intentional, of don't listen to that, because someone who's listening to
Yeah.
their intuition is not listening to somebody else.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's so funny. This is really, I mean, being in the podcast world, and
Mhm.
where you're interviewing so many people and you're doing a lot of research and you're seeing what other people are interviewing. This is really a topic that is coming up a lot.
Mhm.
And absolutely, it I think it's intentional. I think that, and I hate to go into these things, but there's just no other way, because it is what it is.
Right.
And we I mean, there's people out there, unfortunately, that like money more than they like people. And so
Yeah.
that's, and that's ways to control when you look at our food system, the food pyramid, and you know, and the systems that we have in place with doctors and with medication. And we know now, it
Yeah.
is not a secret. It
Right.
is making us sick.
Right.
And so why wouldn't you say to avoid the intuition? I think here's a really good way, Cheryl, of kind of explaining that and talking that the way that like generation after generation after
Mhm.
generation that we've been conditioned and raised to thinking that we need to be quiet. Children
Mhm.
are to be seen and not heard. And so
Mhm.
I grew up that way, although
Mhm.
my mom's pretty lax. I call her she's a total hippie. I mean, my name is April May, for God's sakes. But my father and her parents were, definitely that is it. And I even did it to my kids, Cheryl.
Uh-huh.
Sadly, like I was kind of like a really militaristic parent to my children.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
because I wanted them to show up proper, and I want you to be, quieter when you're supposed to be quieter, and respect. But at the same time, the more that I learn about expression of emotions, like we need that. Like that is
Mhm.
what's healthy, is to really
Mhm.
be able to express ourselves, and people can't do it. They don't know
Mhm.
how, because
Mhm.
it's been stifled.
Mhm.
Like you can't laugh out loud. You can't cry. I mean, the times that I've seen my husband cry, I'm like, "Oh my god. There's like a tiny little tear. I'm so proud of you." I get excited because I'm like, you are showing emotion,
Mhm.
and it's hard for him.
Mhm.
But for something to dwell up deep enough, be emotional enough for him to do that, like
Mhm.
that's great. And we all need to tap more into that, and not to
Mhm.
be like crazy extreme or
Right.
ridiculous, but to really feel, because nobody's feeling their emotions. And because of that, we're bottling that up. It's showing up inside. All the stuff that
Mhm.
you can't see, that energy has to go
Mhm.
somewhere.
Mhm. Well, I'm with Manly, because I like to pretend that I don't have emotions. I have no feelings,
Yeah, a lot
you
of
know?
us do. Most
I
of us do.
Mhm. So,
I mean,
well,
going back to law enforcement, we didn't. I said that law enforcement is very quiet.
mhm.
Because you don't talk to people about your experiences. You can't. They don't understand it.
Right, right, and they don't
Death
wanna hear it even if you
before.
could.
I mean,
Mhm.
we shelter people from death. And
Mhm.
I don't really like that either. I think we should
Mhm.
all know what that is, because it's a thing that
Mhm.
happens.
Tell everybody.
Everything and everybody, there's life cycles, and that is
Mhm.
beautiful.
Mhm.
And the energy doesn't just go away.
Mhm. Yeah, I had that same type of experience of, when I was a respiratory therapist, especially because, that was critical care. It was the emergency room. It was life support. It was the resuscitation team. And, you had to really stuff it so you could perform the way you needed to when you were there on the floor in the unit or whatever. And nobody ever talked about it. We all just kind of would then go about our, business and go home after our shift and go home and go, oh my goodness, there are still to this day, I can remember patients' names. I can remember situations. I remember exactly what they looked like. And you're
Mhm.
talking that would be like 30, sometimes even 40 years ago. And I can remember it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, absolutely. I have some very fun stories too. And my mom too, being a nurse, and she was in geriatrics. So she
Mm,
was, I mean, countless
yeah.
times with people as they passed on.
Mhm.
And I remember I was with my grandmother when she passed on. But yeah, it's a very natural, normal thing. And
Mhm.
why should we shelter that?
Mhm. Mhm. There's something actually, and this is probably going to shock some of the listeners. There's something very peaceful about it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I mean, I remember many, many times just being like honored to be present,
Yeah.
at that moment. And when my mother passed away, I was the only one there when she died.
Yeah.
Everybody had gone, and I was there alone. And it was just really, I was so grateful for that, because sometimes, especially with a bigger family, there's a lot of histrionics, but it was just very quiet, very peaceful, and something I think exactly how she wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I was with my grandmother and I was the only one too, so I understand that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest things for me when I first experienced a lifeless body was it's like a shell.
Hmm.
And it's very hard to describe or explain, but it's just hollow.
Hmm.
And it's so different from, somebody that has blood running through them than others. But
Hmm.
it's definitely a difference that you can feel.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, definitely. So, so let me ask you, all right, so when did you meet your husband? Because I know that you and your husband have a wonderful relationship. And how is it that you put it, that has been your most excellent teacher,
Mm,
and that he makes you laugh every day? And I could
yeah.
see that, because the time that we spoke, on the three of us together, he made me laugh quite a bit, and he's the one that came up with the phrase "the ladies' lair" instead of "my girl cave," and I do use that sometimes.
He's very witty, and yes, he's such a joy. I feel so blessed because he he deals with things and those emotions by through being light and funny
Hmm.
and witty, and he just really does a great job at that. And when I say he makes me laugh every day, I mean, I'm almost certain he does. I don't think that I've ever gone a day without laughing at
Hmm.
least once,
Hmm.
because that's just how he does. So that's how he remains positive, because life is hard. It gets
Hmm.
really dark. And
Hmm.
so he does a better job at that through me. I'm more of the type that kind of goes into this depression and I want to sink in and I want to like just curl up and hide and run. I'm a
Hmm.
runner. I'm like, I'm going to get in the car and drive.
Hmm.
Can't I just escape all of this?
Hmm.
But he does it through humor and he watches things that are funny. And there's a lot of science backing that it really helps elevate you. And so it's a much quicker way to shift that energy
Hmm.
very quickly.
Hmm.
And the way that we met was through work. We both worked at FedEx, and
Hmm.
so that's how I met him. I went to FedEx after law enforcement. It was a really good transition for me, because when you come out of a field like that, it's difficult. You're
Hmm.
coming from this authoritative, respected position to something else, and it feels very difficult to deal
Hmm.
with if you don't learn how to manage that and navigate that. But I spent years, Cheryl, where I felt lack or less than, or like, because it just wasn't where I was supposed to be.
Hmm.
But finding something that elevated me enough to feel like I make a difference was
Hmm.
something. But FedEx was one of those first places that was a great place for me. I got to work myself physically, mentally, all of
Hmm.
the things, and really push myself. And it was 10 times harder than law enforcement ever was as far as the physical stuff.
Oh.
And I mean, it was the hardest job I have ever done,
Hmm.
by far beat law enforcement, period. I I
Hmm.
can't express that enough. And uh because I was a swing driver courier. So that's a lot. And people can look up what that job entails. But that's how we first met.
Hmm.
I was working a PM shift and he was working a day shift. And so I was clocking in as he was clocking out,
Hmm.
and we ran into each other and he told me his name. And I said, well, can I cuss on here, Cheryl?
Oh, sure, go for it.
I said, oh, your name's Manly. Well, your parents are sadistic fucks. Like, who would name their child that? And surprisingly, he's still around. He didn't take that offense to it. But it was just like this automatic reaction,
It
like,
is an unusual name.
who would do that? Like,
Yeah.
how awful, because of course, and his life has played out as such. He was just tortured as a child in school. He was beat up all the time. And so, but that's also what made him become the person that he is.
Mhm.
And he went into
Mhm.
martial arts,
That's
and
right.
he turned it around where he's like, I'm sick of getting beat up and I'm going to do something about it. And so
Mhm.
he strengthened himself,
Mhm.
and then people didn't mess with him
Mhm.
because they were sorry if they did. So what was really great, we have an incredible story. But when we first met, and he didn't, although I might be learning differently now, as far as I know, he didn't have an ulterior motive.
Oh, okay.
But he invited me out. He said, "Hey, you know, there's me and a bunch of friends are going out to the Hofbräu tonight, and it's live karaoke. You should come." We didn't exchange numbers. We He just told me a time and a place.
Mhm.
And I was a stay-at-home mom. Well, not a stay-at-home mom, but a mother of 3. I was
Mhm.
worked a lot. I worked 2 jobs. I was taking care of my grandmother who was elderly.
Oh.
Um, and so I was very, very busy. I did not have a social life at
Mhm.
all. And I
Mhm.
needed one. I mean,
Mhm.
community is something I really, really push
Mhm.
and highlight, because we need that. We need other people. But I didn't have that. I mean, I just had my immediate family, and I was just go, 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 go.
Mhm.
And so I really took a leap of faith for me at the time, because I didn't go out. I didn't have friends. And so and I didn't have his number to confirm. You know how ladies like to triple confirm, like, you
Oh,
sure you're gonna
yes.
be there? You
Yeah.
sure this is the address? This is the time, right? Like, and I showed up and I had a great time. It was so fun. And his friend at the time, I think, well, I know, was very interested in me. We exchanged numbers, but I asked him, I said, hey, can I have Manly's number? Because I was interested in Manly. And so the next night we went out dancing. But those 2 dates, those 2 nights are pretty substantial for us. And
Mm.
that's how we first met.
So that was a pivotal time getting your relationship started.
Yes. Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the fact that you asked his friend for his number.
I did, because, like, I'm not gonna, like, lead you on.
Mhm.
Um, I just wanted to get that out of the way really quickly. Like, that's
Mhm.
I'm flattered that you're interested,
Mhm.
but I'm interested in someone else, in your best friend.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty bold, but I think if you know, you know. And
Exactly.
with Manly, I didn't know right away, but then there was something, it was just like pretty instant, where I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh," and I just
Mhm.
knew. And I
Mhm.
pursued him, actually. It wasn't the other way around. I pursued him, in fact, for 9 months, because he wasn't really interested in a relationship. And because he was working on himself, and he was
Mhm.
raising his teenage son, Riker, who I happily call my own.
Mhm.
He is my son. And
Mhm.
so he just had things that he wanted to work on, but it inspired me. And so when I
Mhm.
say that he's my greatest teacher, Cheryl, I mean, he's my greatest teacher. He
Mhm.
inspired me to work on myself and to
Mhm.
become, the greatest version of myself
Mhm.
for him when he was ready.
Mhm. Was he the one that came up with the idea of a podcast? I'm just curious.
No, I did. And at
Okay.
first, he'll admit it now, he was thinking, this isn't gonna work. That it's like, I mean, oh, that's nice. And now he's very, very beyond supportive.
Mhm.
In fact, sometimes where I'm like, it's challenging, Cheryl. I'm sure, and especially when you go hard at it 5 days a
Mhm.
week. But the monetization isn't there. It comes later. So it's this
Mhm.
great amount of energy that you push into this world, and then the return doesn't come until much later. It's an
Mhm.
investment,
Mhm.
and it just takes time.
Mhm.
But when there's something that's really good and you keep
Mhm.
getting feedback that
Mhm.
what you're doing is great, don't stop. I mean, I've heard
Mhm.
from so many people, including yourself, that
Mhm.
what what we have is valuable,
Mhm.
and don't stop. And
Right.
so also when I started the show, everything started to flow and come in. I mean, I have incredible guests such as
Mhm.
yourself. And we like the synchronicities keep
Mhm.
coming. Everything just starts to work. And
Mhm.
because of that, you don't want to stop. And
You
in
can't
for
stop.
me, no, and for me, it's extremely substantial because I haven't felt this valued, or I don't even know if that's the word, but I haven't felt, I think, ever really, or since law enforcement, that this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm
Mhm.
supposed to do.
Mhm. It's really interesting because I don't. Some of the listeners might know this. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But most podcasters give up before they even record 10 sessions or 10 episodes
Mm,
because
yeah.
it's labor intensive, it's a labor of love.
Yeah.
There are a lot of incredible frustrations along the way, like technical issues. But once you get that rhythm going, you get that groove, you start talking to people that you never would have ever spoken to before in your life, and
Yeah.
they have an impact on you and your listeners. It's like, well, why would I stop?
Right. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
amazing. It's about the connections
it is about
that
the
you never
connections.
dreamed possible.
Hmm.
And it just continues to open your mind
Hmm.
into new possibilities. And yeah, it's I don't want to stop. I love doing it,
Hmm. Good
and I
thing,
find a
because
lot
you're
of
doing it
joy.
5 days a week.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
must love it.
I do love it. It's definitely a full-time thing. I do love it. And it's yeah, it's incredible.
Mhm.
My goal is the worldwide audience, and
Mhm.
we're already, I mean, we live in a day and age where with
Mhm.
technology, we can make information travel. I mean, that's one of the most powerful things we have as human beings right now
Mhm.
is we can communicate and understand what's going on across
Mhm.
the entire world. And there's so much power in that.
Absolutely, and I really think that, and I've said this so many times before, that when we can talk to each other and share each other's stories, that we will discover that we've got a lot more in common. We are all a lot more alike than we think we are different. And I think that that's the narrative that's been pushed, on us for the past few years recently, that, oh, we are all different. And no, we're human beings and we all have the same type of, wants, needs, desires, fears, everything. It might not be exactly
Mm.
the same, but the more we talk to each other, the more clarity we get on that. And that's one of the reasons why I always have men on my show. I mean, I love being able to listen to men's voices as well as the women's,
Mhm.
because men are people too. And you just hear some of the most amazing stories.
You do. And, I think what part of what you're describing is it's a collective consciousness.
Mm,
That's why it's so important to work on yourself. It starts with the individual first, because
mhm,
that collective consciousness, it spreads. And
mhm,
that's why we share such similarities and things that happen to us, because we're all
mhm,
on this human journey and experience together, but in different ways. I mean, it's very unique as well, but we're all connected. And the more that it's like a smile is contagious. It's that exact same
mhm,
thought.
mhm. So, okay, April, where can the listeners find your show? How do they
Ah,
subscribe?
type in the Wellness Driven Life Show and it's going to pop up on whatever platform you desire. So I shouldn't say whatever platform. Of course, we're not on all of them. There's many, 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 but I would say the top ones. So as far as if you're a listener and you like your podcast world, the nice thing about this show, I call it a talk show because it's that visual aspect too, just like we're doing here. And I love that so much. So we have the YouTube channel and then we have numerous podcasts. If you like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the things, type in the Wellness Driven Life Show and you will find it. I think the one handle that is different is our TikTok handle because we had too many letters. So instead of the Wellness Driven Life Show, it's Wellness Driven Life Show. And my lovely husband makes the TikTok videos. And what's fabulous about that for all of you MTVers who know what that is a lot of those videos he makes it's like a MT video, music video. So they're really fun. And so much of the 80s, I like to call it our love story being pushed out into the universe. I think they're really cool. They're fun. Anyway, that's the really fun aspect of what we do in our social media content.
Nice. Oh, so before we sign off, and thank you for being here today. This has been absolutely delightful. I always love talking to you. What final bit of pearl of wisdom or bit of knowledge or something that you would like to leave with the audience so they can think about it for the next couple of days after listening to your story? What would you like to leave them with?
Listen to yourself. Get quiet. Because every time that I have been the most sick, I have learned that it's not about going to a doctor and getting a diagnosis. It's about, I know that I created the illness and I can uncreate the illness. And it takes work, but it's first about quieting yourself and listening. If you want to call it intuition, you know, if you want to call it meditation, I don't care what you call it, but it's about sitting with yourself and listening to your body and just calming it down. Breath work is incredible. I learned that first in law enforcement to get calm and cool headed enough in order to perform, you know, and utilize a gun if you needed to, you know, when you're in a very high stress situation. But we're all living in high stress situations. It's the same thing, right? We're constantly in this fight or flight. And that's what creates disease. Our bodies aren't designed to do that. Many of you have heard that and you understand that. So quiet yourself.
Well, that's great advice. So thank you for that. And thank you again for all the wonderful stories and your incredible tips that you have peppered in through our conversation. I've absolutely loved it.
You are welcome. My pleasure.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. As always, please do subscribe to the show. Share this episode with everybody you know. There's so much wonderful, valuable information here. And do go to April's podcast and subscribe and follow her on social media. All the links, everything are included in the show notes. So she can run, but she can't hide. So
thank you, Cheryl.
And remember to take the time to get quiet, listen to yourself, listen to your body, because your body is smarter than you think it is. And you definitely want to listen to it. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.